Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all, and a huge welcome to Craft School Challenge, our third CPD of our series. My name is Melissa Jamal, and I'm the Education Manager here at the Crafts Council. And if you were unable to join us in our previous CPDs, these sessions have been recorded and those videos are now available for you to view online on the website. And I really highly recommend and encourage you to go and check them out. They are really fantastic resources. So the aim of the CPD sessions is to enhance your experience with the program and to give you a chance to pick up any new skills and knowledge and to really support you in planning and delivering craft school with your learners. So as well as displaying all the different skills and knowledge, it's also a really fantastic opportunity to dive deep into any different craft career routes that also are of interest to your learners too. Each session brings together craft professionals, educators and specialists, and they're here to share their insights into the craft practice and different pedagogies, ways of working, and offering practical ideas, lots of inspiration and guidance that you can take and directly use in the classroom. So this is our overview for today. We'll welcome you to the challenge. We'll hear from ActionSpace, an organisation supporting young people and adults with learning disabilities. We will have a make-along and hear from textile artist Aya Haidar, and then we'll have some time at the end for some question and answers. So please do make sure that you make use of the chat feature and we'll answer some of your questions at the end. So welcome to Craft School. Craft School is the Crafts Council annual nationwide education program designed to get young people making again. It's a completely free program and it's open to all learners from early years foundation stage all the way through key stage 4, so that's ages 3 to 16. And each year we invite learners to create their own 3D work in response to a creative brief. At the end of the program, images of these amazing creations are then submitted to the Crafts Council, and all of the craft pieces that you submit will be celebrated on our online gallery in June. So the brief this year is in partnership with our Maker Champion, Jasleen Kaur. And we're here to invite learners to use craft and making to explore the themes of community. So Jasleen is an interdisciplinary artist from Glasgow whose work crosses lots and mixes lots of mixed media, often creating multi-sensory environments. So her work engages with personal and cultural identity using everyday objects and sounds to explore themes like community, like we are doing in this challenge, community histories, stories, and traditions. So the brief is intentionally open-ended, as Craft School is underpinned by our Make First approach. And Make First is the Crafts Council's signature pedagogy or a method to teaching and learning about craft. It champions a learner-led approach to making. So it's one that places and empowers young people and the makers at the center and at the heart of the making process. So we encourage young people to follow their curiosity, explore materials, become brave and resilient makers, and it sort of helps develop these skills of materiality, learning with and from materials. Essentially, it's about the joy that comes with making and all the while supporting learners to develop their own unique voices as makers. So our theme of community. Learners will be reflecting over the previous couple of months and a few months to come on this idea of community. And with that, thinking about ideas of maybe belonging to a community. So this can be personal, it can be local, it could be global. And we really want them to explore how materials can be used to reflect these stories and these connections. So the brief encourages learners to consider why and how people come together, whether that's through their family and carers, through shared values or common spaces like schools, parks, places of worship, libraries. So communities can form through lots of different ways. It can be through culture, it could come through shared language, it could be through shared activities like craft, like music, or through shared food. So by exploring these connections, we hope that your learners will gain a really deep appreciation for the diversity and the richness of the world around them and their own personal stories, and essentially really trying to develop their unique voices as makers. So as well as these CPDs, we have got a whole variety of free online resources for you, and these are located on the Resource Hub on the website. We have got toolkits that are packed full of useful information and ready to use lesson plans and ideas to support you to deliver craft school. We also have really fantastic video resources to inspire you, plus educator forums, which are the informal space. They're not recorded, they're our informal space that bring together a community online of teachers, practitioners who are enrolled on craft school. And it's our special place to kind of discuss how the program is going, share practice and ideas, and really gain experiences as we progress through the program. So the next one is specifically looking at the brief through the secondary school lens, but it's open for all. So please do join us. Now, up first, we are so thrilled to be joined by Flora Bain, the Program Manager at ActionSpace. And ActionSpace supports young people and adults with learning disabilities. And I'm sure Flora will share some really valuable insights to help you as teachers and practitioners to consider your SEND pupils specifically in your classroom environments. So thank you so much, Flora, for this evening. It's over to you.
Thank you. I don't know if people can see me as well as see the slide, but hello to everyone and thanks for joining us today. Yeah, my name's Flora Bain, and just before I start talking about ActionSpace, a bit about my background. I worked in learning and communications in galleries and museums. So I started out in Oxford University Museums, and then I've worked in other places, including the Design Museum in London. And before joining ActionSpace, I was at the Mosaic Rooms, which is a Palestinian-funded gallery, and in West London. They're just about to reopen, actually, so do check them out. And it was there that I also worked with Aya, so nice coincidence for today. But moving on to ActionSpace, what you can see now is one of our studios. It's a studio in South London, in Studio Voltaire. ActionSpace have this big shared studio space for our artists to work in. I'm just going to talk a bit about what ActionSpace is, about what our artists do, and a little bit about workshops as well, about how people can get involved in making with our artists. I think, yeah, first just to say that ActionSpace as an organisation was founded in the 1960s. So by artists working with communities in London. They focused on the visual arts over time and on supporting learning disabled artists. And so now we're one of the leading organisations in the UK supporting learning disabled artists. As a visual arts organisation, don't worry, we don't have to move yet. I'll say that. Thank you. As a visual arts organisation, the supported studios like the one you can see here is at the core of our work. And I don't know if people have heard of supported studios. There are different supported studios all across the country, working in different ways as well. So I'll say a little bit about how ActionSpace supported studios work. We support learning disabled artists. We work with adults, so that's 18 plus. We might be working with people just leaving education, and we go right up to 85 plus. So you can see in the centre here, Chandrakant Patel, who's one of our older artist who works in Studio Voltaire in South London. And how our studio works, we are a studio where artists attend every week, at least once a week. And the choice and interest of the artist is paramount. So every artist obviously develops their own individual practice. And as a supported studio, it's the job of the studio to provide the artist with the materials, offer materials, demonstrate techniques, and for the artist to take them up or not as they feel. Some of our artists have been with the studios for many years and have a very established practice. Other artists are still developing their practice, and ActionSpace is for all of those people. So we support artists with a higher degree of learning disability. We recognise there's a wide range of neurodiversity, but we work with artists who wouldn't be able to access studio practice otherwise. And as part of the studio, we have artist facilitators who are non-learning disabled artists who have expertise in supporting our artists. And also to say that once people join, that people can be part of ActionSpace for as long as is useful to them. So we have new artists who've been with us for 6 months, a year. We have artists who've been with us for 10 to 20 years. It's we're there for them to draw on as part of our role is to provide that supported studio. And then alongside that, we as a team support our artists with professional opportunities as well. And that's part of our job. And I guess what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about a few artists with our studios. And I'd like to go to the next slide, Mel. Thank you. Just to highlight that I guess our standout moment from last year as ActionSpace, it was quite a moment when we were for the Turner Prize announcement, when it was announced that Nena Kalu, who's a long-standing ActionSpace artist, was the winner of the Turner Prize 2026. So that's, I guess, the UK's most high-profile art award, and Nena won that award. And you can see her here on the night, and she's in front of some of her drawings. So Nena works in drawing and sculpture, and she works in series. So she'll work on 2 or 3 drawings at any one time. So she's in front of a pair of her drawings. And that prize didn't come from nowhere. Nena has been making work for well over 20 years. Working from ActionSpace Studios. She's been part of the community of ActionSpace because it is the community. Our studios, our artists work together alongside each other throughout the year. And then it has her own studio now as well, actually, alongside the main studio. But the attention on her work has been relatively recent. So Mel, if you could go to the next slide, just to see an image of Nena making in the studio. So behind her, there's a series of her drawings that are kind of stacked against the wall. And she's working on a sculpture here. So this is with materials that have that she has refined her selection of from being over the years. So she works with tape, she works with videotape. You can see here, there's a kind of structure in the middle that she's kind of building the sculpture around. So noting, I guess, from this kind of theme of community, that historically learning disabled artists have been excluded from mainstream cultural community. The practice of learning disabled artists has historically been dismissed or othered. And in the more recent past, work by disabled artists has often been talked about as outsider art, which was a kind of way of positioning that art. But now kind of we're moving beyond that, so that artists are included in the mainstream. I guess thinking about how the contemporary art world is being kind of pushed to expand beyond the realm of the kind of white, predominantly male artists from the US and a few European countries. it's starting to realize what it's been missing, or being pushed to realize what it's been missing. And learning disabled artists are breaking through as part of this as well. So yeah, just to see Nen working in the studio there. I'd like to go onto the next slide. And you can see Nena's work installed because she has been exhibiting internationally. And this was Nena's sculptures exhibited for Barcelona's Manifesta, big kind of international art event in Barcelona. And they're installed in this, I think it's called the Three Chimneys power station. And her work is also being collected by Tate as well. Yeah, so if we can move from there on to the next slide to see, this is just the gallery view of Nena's Turner Prize exhibition. So it shows some of the sculptures that you saw just now, or some of them reworked, and then a series of drawings around the room. And this also kind of gives a sense of like the range of the different studio practice, that sense that like a maker or an artist is not just restricted, obviously, to one type of thing, and having these different practices is really important for some artists. Certainly Nena has these like two distinct practices. And it also kind of made me think about like this idea of kind of including and people being the kind of profile of artists, to encourage teachers, obviously, and educators, so I'm sure are already thinking about this, but coming back to that theme of how you can build this sense of community in the wider art community for all students, whether learning disabled or non-learning disabled or whatever. Are they finding out about these artists? Are learning disabled artists alongside a whole range of other artists being included in the curriculum and their specific practices as well, because there's no one learning disabled artist. There are people with very different practices that could inspire your students. So I'd really encourage you to look at Nena's work, for example, look at some of the other artists with ActionSpace, or some of the other supported studios as well, because there are supported studios. Although we're all very different, we kind of know each other. So I think there'll be people from different parts of the country, and we work with, there's studios, certainly Venture Arts in Manchester, for example, Project Artworks in Hastings, Project Ability in Glasgow. There will be supported studios near where you are, and it's kind of worth looking at what artists are doing locally, artists and makers are doing locally. On that note, I thought I'd just talk about a few of the few other artists for some inspiration. And if we go to the next slide, you can see Thompson Hall, who's another ActionSpace artist. And you can see works here where he's been working on textiles. He's a painter. And this is, some of these are exploring kind of colonial legacy. So he was working with like wax last printed fabrics, and working on stuff around empire and colonialism, and also social exclusion. You can see that kind of by his shoulder. There's a painting that he did there, and this is a residency that he did in a local art gallery. So, I mean, a local art gallery, it's Autograph Gallery in London. So he was in residence there for 3 months, making work in the gallery and developing from there. If we go to the next slide, you can see his work being that was installed on the exterior of the gallery just near Old Street in central London. I then want to go on to another ActionSpace artist who works in 3D predominantly. If we could go to the next image, Andrew Omerding. Andrew is a sculptor. He's been with ActionSpace for quite a long time as well. Since he was a young man. I mean, he's not old now. He's still young, but he was like since he was a teenager when he joined us. So Andrew, if we go to the next image, he's a sculpture, and you can see some of his sculptures. So Andrew had a solo exhibition at Camden Arts Centre last year. He originally got to know Camden Arts Centre through teaching workshops and had a residency. And then later, the gallery came back and offered him this solo exhibition. And I thought his process of making is really interesting to look at, maybe kind of quite inspiring in terms of working with objects, he works with kind of found objects and textiles and kind of builds forms out of them. So these are kind of cow-like creatures on the left and on the right, and then in the middle there is a kind of a lion character that you can't really see so well here. Is like a fantastic kind of full of life object, and hanging from the ceiling as well as a story. So he worked with stories in his work. And just to go to the next image, there's a close-up of one of his objects that he creates this beautiful sense of balance in his sculptures, and I think they're kind of quite inspiring for makers potentially to think about how you combine materials. Are we okay for time, Mel? Good. Okay. Yeah, and I'd also then move on from Andrew's work. I think there might be a picture after this of Andrew teaching a workshop. So our artists do lots of different things, like mainly everything's centered around studio practice, but other opportunities come up as well. So some of our artists teach workshops around their practice to inspire others and connect them with their art. And Andrew, who's also wearing kind of costume there, because performance is also part of his work, is leading a making workshop here at the V&A. And I guess we're aware here, I mean, he both here and then in the next slide, we've got another image of young people making. So these are young people from a college who've come into our studio in West London. And they're making work that's kind of in response to our studio artists' work. So that kind of the artist's work from the studio has been the jumping off point for artwork that the students are then making in the studio to have a kind of flavor of studio practice. And also we're very aware as well that for these that young learning disabled peoples then seeing learning disabled artists in their studio teaching workshops, that it's also kind of potential inspiration for them to think about, like, what could come next, what kind of thing do they want to do, and to kind of experience making led by an older peer. And some of our artists really enjoy that connection as well. Yeah, so giving a little sense of that, and I'm just going to the next picture, which kind of I realized, so the central artist there is called Declan Leslie, who does amazing ink drawings, which I have then not included in the presentation, so I might send through. But this was a project which I think is worth looking at as well as teachers. This Camden Arts Centre SEND programme, they work intensively with 2 schools over 2 years, and an ActionSpace artist, Declan, worked with alongside 2 other artists for three years. So coming in weekly, meeting with schools, running workshops, and this was a kind of very open-ended way for an ActionSpace artist to work alongside other artists, developing kind of creative workshops that connected for SEND students. But I think their activities could have worked with any schools, and it's really worth kind of looking up what they did on the website. Again, I'll send a link to that programme. And then finally, I think I'd like to go on to Mohammed Imran Khan, Imran, who's one of our younger artists. He's been with ActionSpace for, I think, 7, 8 years now, which I know seems like quite a while, but in ActionSpace terms, it's yeah, he's a kind of developing artist, but he's got a really lovely practice now, which he's developed over a long time. You know, when people first come into our studios, I guess going back to the making, it's about developing like working out what your practice is going to be as an artist. And Imran has developed this beautiful practice, and the works here kind of like layering up panels of color. If that's part of a commission for hospital rooms, and there's some of his works are going to be installed in a new hospital in Bristol. It's a kind of paid commission for him. So again, getting a sense of the kind of professional opportunities that come for our artists. Um, and then I'll just move on to the final slide, which is a picture of Andrew at the end of his workshop with people walking through the gallery. I just thought it's kind of an image of like of joy, of being, of making, and of sharing what you do, and that kind of creative explosion that can happen when artists and other creative people get together. And I hope that will kind of be some inspiration. I really urge you to look up our artists and find out more about supported studios near you, and consider how like that practice of artist facilitation that is run in supported studios could kind of bring something to your own students as well in the classroom. I think that's it from me. And I'll be around later if anyone has any questions as well.
I just wanted, before we hand over to Aya, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Flora. This conversation is a really important one, particularly around visibility. I know that we re reflect on our curriculum, and we constantly try to refine the representation of makers and artists. And you've raised a really important point here, that actually we got to really think about the type of examples of making an artist that our young people are seeing, and those with learning disabled, those are learning disabled artists don't often get the recognition that they utterly deserve. So I think hearing from you has been extremely empowering to go back and maybe review what type of learners we've been looking at over the makers, sorry, we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks with the craft school program. And now is a great opportunity to maybe refine and think about some different types of making and sculpture that you've really beautifully presented here today. Thank you so much. If there's any
Pleasure.
questions in the chat, we will love to hear them. And at the end, Flora will have some time, hopefully, to answer some of the questions for you. So up next, we've got the incredible Aya Haidar, textiles artist, and we're really excited to hear all your stories and narratives of how you combine storytelling with cultural identity, and personal stories, and how you weave that into your making and your workshops. So we are so honored to have you this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time, Aya, and it's over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Flora, for your incredible presentation. It's good to see you again. And thank you, Mel and Faith, for allowing me this platform to continue. I'm not sure how many of the the teachers were in the talk that I gave about my practice. But I'm not going to go into the same conversations as I did the first time. As you said, Mel, I think that it's been recorded, so that's available as a resource. What I wanted to do was to break down my talk in the lead up to my making, to think about well, I wanted to introduce who I am as a person, and then my journey through art school, and then my journey more specifically into textiles, and then my personal reflections as to why I find textiles anarchic as a medium, as a concept, as a way of making. So my name is Aya Haidar. My parents are both Lebanese, and they fled Lebanon in 1982 when the Israelis invaded. That story, that like fundamental start to everything, is really what I've always tried to piece together through my practice. They fled Lebanon, they via Syria through Jordan. Saudi Arabia was the only country that really allowed them to enter at the time, and they lived there until I was 6. And then when I was 6, we moved to the UK. And really, and even though I've gone back and forth to Lebanon countless times in the year throughout my whole childhood. I speak Arabic fluently. My mother raised us in a very, Lebanese household where she cooked Lebanese food. We spoke exclusively Arabic. We listened to Arabic music, all our customs and our traditions, and her strictness was very much rooted in like our Arab Lebanese culture. The Arab identity was very, very strong for me growing up. But nevertheless, there was this, I still felt this kind of in-betweenness because when I go back to Lebanon, even though I look Lebanese, I speak fluent Arabic, all of that, I have Lebanese citizenship, all of that, I still felt that I didn't quite belong or I wasn't rooted in the same way as a normal Lebanese person because I never endured. I never endured the war, the conflicts, the even just kind of going back and knowing that if anything happened, I knew that I had the privilege of my British passport. And so I did feel very othered being there, the system, there's a very big collapse societally there. And I never had that. I had the privilege of living in the West and kind of dipped into the chaos of the East, but actually, and I never felt like I was really allowed to be 100% purely Lebanese. And when I was here, even though I have a British accent, I, went through a Western education system, all of that. I was always asked, where are you from? I'm from London, oh, but where are you really from? And so you're kind of in this middle ground, and that's okay. But I suppose I became obsessed with piecing that together and understanding why they left, how they left, what ties them to this land, what the nostalgia of it, what connects them, what is this longing that they have, why, when you're forced to leave somewhere, what is it that you long for? My grandfather never died on his land. He was never allowed to go back, and so there's so many parts of the story that I've always tried to piece together through my work. This is important because it ties back later. For me, art was something, it was like visual language was the only way in which I made sense of the world. It offered me a different perspective. I always saw things in a very different way to all my peers. I always was curious. I was really inquisitive. And I always understood things by making. I walked everywhere with a notebook and I collected leaves or I did rubbings on different textures or I made notes of things. I sketched. I always had something with me at all times. And my mind didn't click in any other way other than making. It was like an impulse to make all the time. Every school break, I was in the art room. Every after school club, I was just there all the time. And so when I finished my secondary school, I knew that I needed to do something creative. My parents were very unusual because they let me. And so many of my friends' parents didn't, especially Arabs who were like, yeah, this is great, but it's a hobby. You've got to go make money. And my parents were really trusting and they said, look, you have to fulfill whatever your passion is. When they left in 1982, they lost absolutely everything and they had to rebuild everything. And my father always said to me that, and my father's passed away now, but one of the things he always said to me was, you risk losing everything in this world, your clothes, your home, even the people you love, the food on your table, everything can be gone like that. But when you learn something, when you apply yourself to something that you are passionate about, nobody can ever take that knowledge away. And so he always was very supportive of anything I wanted to learn because he knew that if you're driven enough to pursue it, then it doesn't matter whether or not you're successful, but you will be fulfilled inside. And then that drives you to success, whatever that success may look like for people. So I went on to do a foundation course at Chelsea College of Art. I then went on and did a BA at the Slade School of Art. And in my third year at the Slade, I had a real pivotal moment where I did an exchange at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and that gave me a really that was a shift for me because up until that point, my grandmother played a very, very formative role in my upbringing. I saw her every single day. She lived down the road from us, and I spent a lot of time with her. I'd say probably more time than my own mother. And there weren't gadgets at the time. Her TV was never on. We didn't go out and do fancy things, but we sat in the house all the time while she cooked, while she mended, while she sewed. And she used her hands. And the way in which I pieced together my story and our history, her story, my mother's story, where we came from, where all my questions were answered, was by this window with her as she mended, as she repaired, as she stitched, as she cooked. Um, and I helped her. I helped her core out the inside of a courgette. I helped her mend a sock. I helped her do all sorts of things. And so the habit of busying our hands while talking was something that was inherent from as far as I can remember. So that language of sharing and speaking and unpacking and opening up was very much connected to making. But when I was at the School of the Art Institute, that's when the shift happened where I understood textiles as being political. I took a course in it was called propaganda and decoration. The Americans do it so well. Like they really had these really interesting courses where they they really shed light on how textiles are inherently political. And up until that point, I think there have been socially, but also personally, I have to admit that I think a lot of people connected textiles to being something that lived within the realms of the domestic, something that's twee, something that's functional. And I think, I mean, this is in the early 2000s, but and for me, it was definitely that. I knitted and I sewed and I stitched to mend or to fix or to make something rather than make a statement on something. But little did I know that actually the act of making was the political bit. And it took me going there to understand the history of artists that have done that, but also collectively as women specifically, the kind of feminist undertones of textiles and fabric. Um, I, looking at how, I want to quickly shift onto how I then shifted to pursue a master's at the London School of Economics in politics. And a lot, I mean, my work's always been very socially and politically engaged, but it kind of happened it was almost like a rebellious decision to do that. And it all stemmed from my degree show at the Slade, where I'd spent a year patching this tent out of children's clothes. And on the inside was this really elaborately embroidered inside, where all the items that were embroidered on the inside told our story of displacement, told my mother's story of displacement, told my father and my grandmother's stories of displacement, thinking about I suppose the reasons why they left and how they left, but also the things they left behind, the things that they held on to, the what they long for. And I spent a year working on that. And I remember at my degree show, we had a final crit and it was completely disregarded. I mean, we had a crit and I had some very brutal comments about it. Comments like, there is no space for politics in art. Comments like, it's not relative. Nobody can relate to your stories. You have to make it universal. You can't make it specific. People can't relate to it. And so it's hard for people for it to have impact. And I remember someone likening it to Sylvanian families, which is this like really twee little, like they're little dolls that children play with. And I was absolutely devastated. I mean, this is my first, I mean, I can't remember how old I was. I was 18. Oh, no, I wasn't 18. I was about 20. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like I've spent a year making this project and it's so extremely personal. I mean, these are hours of me sitting with my grandma talking, and those confessions and stories are embroidered on the inside of this tent. And I felt like it was an absolute rejection of not just the idea, but also of me, of our story. It was not valid. It wasn't relevant. And actually, I felt that it was relevant. These are really important conversations to be had. And so then I went back to my studio space And one of my peers came up to me and said, "Look, I don't think that you are cut out for the art world. I think that you're an activist and I think you're very politically charged, but I think you have a purpose to work for the UN and work in politics. So why don't you apply to LSE and see if you can pursue a career in advocacy?" And I was so upset and so empty. I felt really deflated that I did apply, and I was like, well, maybe I'm not thick-skinned enough. And so I applied, and I got a place. There were 15 places on this course. On my application form, the first thing I wrote was, I have absolutely no idea what I can offer other than a different perspective on life because I'm an artist at heart. That's it. And I got a place. And at my degree show, there was some galleries that walked around to scout artists. And they came around, and I was the only artist that got represented by a gallery. And they came up to me and said to me, "Your work is so political and it's so relevant and it's so important to be told." And I told them I was doing a master's and that I was done. And they said, "We'll wait for you." And they waited. I did my master's, and then I had my first solo show after a year. And so for me, the reason why I'm telling this story is because ultimately, I think teachers have such an important role in shaping the minds of their students. And I think that the way in which I think teachers have an amazing power to inspire. And I feel like actually this idea that there is a right and a wrong is can be crippling to a lot of people. And thankfully, I think it worked out in the end. But I think my fate in becoming an artist was inevitable because, like I said at the beginning, it's a visual language, something that I absolutely have no control over. I couldn't sit and write policy at a desk at a computer all day. I can't. It's something I can't not make. But I do think that the power of teachers is something that we don't speak about enough. And especially when you have artists that are vulnerable, that are opening up and making work that is so incredibly powerful, that job is really a gift, you know, to be able to work with people who offer vulnerability all the time. I want to move on quickly to textiles as anarchy. And I fundamentally believe it is anarchic to work with textiles, specifically women, because collectively we historically used to sit together in circles and make. And when we make, we talk. And while we talk, I suppose we filter out our days and everything that's happening, whether they're in our clans or our tribes or in a society or in our household, and we're able to understand the world better and understand how we exist and what the important things are in the world to us, you know, how we approach things. And as we stitch and as we make, our children play at our feet because we are usually the main caregivers of our children. And our children then in turn learn about where they come from and their heritage and their history and how we tell stories. They learn all that. And so the preservation of heritage, and then they pass that on to their children in turn. And so the preservation of heritage and history is really held in the hands of women. I really deeply believe that. And if you look at tatriz and Palestinian embroidery, which is a very clear example, you know, the erasure of Palestinian culture is something that is constantly under active threat all the time under, you know, Israeli occupation. But the one thing that keeps and holds the preservation of that is tatriz, which means embroidery, women's craft. And there's a really beautiful quote that says, Men fight with the sword, women fight with the needle." And I really believe that the preservation of our heritage and our history is held in the hands of women, but also the longevity of that moving forward is also held in the hands of women. Okay. I want to talk about a few projects. I'm going to talk about one, two, three, four projects. And then, sorry, I just want to have a look at my time check. Yeah, that's fine.
Hi,
And yes,
sorry. Can we just have you been moving your slides along?
no, I'm going to move on now.
Oh, okay, just checking.
So I just went through all those 4 points. I know that there was no visuals because I didn't feel like I needed a visual, but now that the visuals are coming. I want to talk about 4 projects and then I'm going to move on to my making. So the first project, thinking about textiles as anarchy, and also thinking about the idea that you set out not to make an object but to activate a textile. The idea is that you're activating these fibers rather than, the finished product. So I was commissioned to make this public artwork in Abu Dhabi, which is in the Emirates, and I was interested in looking at Bedouin culture and demystifying the image of Arab women as being these like second-rate, submissive women who hide behind the veil. Whereas historically, that is absolutely not the case. Women were the main breadwinners. Bedouin women were the main breadwinners. They were the force of their tribes in different ways. Because they were the ones who crafted and the ones who wove, they created the shelters. And because they wove, they're the ones who created the clothing and they were the ones who ensured people were warm and dressed. And because they did that, they also created artifacts which they were able to sell and then create money for their communities. So women were the real main life givers of their tribes. And actually it was men who took care of the children and who did the kind of secondary jobs. So women really held that. It was only when oil was discovered in Arabia that changed, and people then moved to the cities, and the whole economy changed. But traditionally, it was like this. And also, the colors that they wore, black didn't exist. It was not black. It was vibrant colors, vibrant textiles. And so this idea of the Arab woman is something that, is very modern and extremely Eurocentric. It's not at all reflective of that. And so I created this Bedouin tent. This is a traditional Sadu woven tent. This is the way it would have been woven. And then I hung these dresses where on it I embroidered images of of them weaving, of how they would have woven to create, to kind of in their tribes. Again, here, these are the women weaving and the men took care of their children. And this is across all of Arabia, and so I beaded it in gold. But yes, traditionally, all the kind of weavings where they sat on, how they lived, all of their clothes was all produced by women. The next work I wanted to talk about was A Woman's Place, and this is a really large scale textile where this was at the time of well, it was a reflection on a lot of the revolutions that were happening and led by women, specifically the revolution that happened in Lebanon. And it was it was led by women. It was the women's revolution. And this is a collection of my bed sheets, my tea towels, some of my children's clothes, my cleaning rags, and I ripped them all to shreds. These are all markers of my place in the domestic, my place because I'm a woman, typically seen. This is where I belong, is in the house, at the kitchen, taking care of the children. But I ripped up all these markers that say where I belong, that kind of inform where I belong, and I made this massive statement because women's place is absolutely in the revolution. The shift has to come from women, you know. Thinking so the reason why I included these is because when you're thinking about workshops, the material is so loaded before you even use it. So I didn't just go out and buy different linens and make this. It's very, very important that I slept on these sheets, that I used these sheets to clean, that I dressed my children in them, that these are almost like the language of my labor. And I've taken that and I've ripped them to shreds actively, and I've almost like rephrased it into something that is an assertion, of something that I believe in. So the material is really important. With the Solar series, I think I spoke about the Solar series when I did my initial presentation, but I wanted to use this as an example because these are shoes that have been collected, that have been worn, because they're stories of migrants, they're stories of displaced people. And with the wearing and tearing of the act of moving and walking, the shoes reveal different tears and different wears. And this is like, before I even embroider anything onto it, this is proof of of feet wearing down on the shoes. And so it's proof of displacement, it's proof of movement, it's proof of migration, it's proof of all of that. And so I looked very carefully at these voids inside the material, inside the shoe, and I wanted to tell a story. And this specifically is called Patrol, and this is the story of mother. I was sat across from her on a residency. I did a 4 month residency where I lived. I moved up to rural Aberdeenshire with my two young kids at the time, and I was sat across from one woman, a Syrian woman who was breastfeeding her baby. Sorry, she wasn't breastfeeding. I was breastfeeding my baby. She was sat across from me, and she looked at me and told me to hold my baby tight. And I asked her where her children were. And she had crossed the Mediterranean and had her baby, who was very, very young, I believe 3 months old. And the baby was screaming, screaming, screaming because it was cold or hungry. And the traffickers kept telling her to shut her baby up, and she couldn't shut her baby. She couldn't quieten her baby. And so the trafficker pulled her baby out of her arms and threw the baby overboard. And because there were loads of patrol boats around trying to find these trafficked dinghies. And so the story never really left me, but these shoes represent, you know, I suppose the movement of those people, but thinking about the holes or the voids that they leave, and how do you fill those voids? How do you tell a story onto an already very loaded object? And so this is a detail of the boats, and there are hundreds of boats. There are so many boats, and very, very few make it across. And so in the middle are some people who do perish, and these are the patrol boats. So again, thinking about the object that you are inviting in to work with, they're loaded and they tell a story before you even pass a needle through it. And then similarly here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, you can't see my mouse, but this is again worn shoes. And if you look on the left, when I had them, there was just this cluster of dirt. I think I have just very dirty feet, or they're like worn, from just the dirt of your feet, and they leave a mark. And so before I stitch, I look at what the immediate shape is. It's almost like this, it's almost like you're revealing something that was already in it before like putting something on it premeditatively. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. I wanted to talk about a social engagement project because I think this could be quite relative to teachers. Because I think it's fine approaching your work conceptually, but actually when you're met with a classroom and how do you engage a classroom with it? I was invited to do this project in Dover with a group of children, and this is there's a lot of movement in this school because a lot of parents, the parents of the children are in the Navy, and so a lot of the children have very inconsistent attendance, and so they have to move a lot. And specifically, there's a big Nepalese community in Dover, and a lot of the parents of those children are Gurkhas, and so I thought a lot about notions of home and belonging, and for families that are constantly moving, constantly uprooted and replaced and all of that, thinking about what home is. And so I asked children to reflect on what home is. But these big concepts like displacement and migration or coming from a land far away, there's a lot of British kids that have absolutely no concept of that because they're born and raised where they live, and they're like their only connection to that is through the news, and sometimes they have no connection to that even through a screen. And that's valid still. Everyone has a connection to home, whatever that concept is. And so some children stitched a parent or someone important to them, and some of them, for them, home is ships, is moving, is the Navy. For others, it's idea of Nepal, being Nepalese, and that even though they're in Dover, what is that faraway land that is actually home to them? So getting children to reflect on a really broad concept, but making it personal is really, really important. And I wanted to finish before I make my make along with this Japanese ways of making boro and sashiko, which informs body of work that I'm going to introduce. So boro is a practice or aesthetic of mending and layering worn textiles. Oh, I can't see the rest of the slide because my camera's thing. But anyway, over the course of their life, it's about reuse, patchwork, and visible repairs, versus sashiko, which is a stitching technique. It's decorative, repetitive, running stitches. It's used for reinforcement or decoration. Um, so this is an example of well, this would be sashiko, where they are reinforcing they're almost decoratively stitching to reinforce the fabric, whereas this would be boro, which is where you use old bits of scraps and you patch them together to reinforce it in a different way. So if you see, sashiko is more the stitch, whereas boro is the layering of materials. So I want to talk about circular, which is a body of work, which I actually have with me, and I will show you in real or on my handheld screen when I'm making. But this is an example of so thinking back to my grandmother, what my grandmother and I spent a lot of time together, and she would always be knitting. And one of the things about one of the I suppose the privilege of being around her so much as a young child is that I understood the value of materials. I understood the value of how you honored those materials versus the disposability of the world we live in today. And I'm not just talking from like an environmental perspective. Obviously, that's really important. I feel very strongly having four kids now. I'm very, very, very careful. I'm almost like militant over we do not consume anything. Every single thing that comes through the house is secondhand or handmade. It has to be. There is, I don't even have, I mean, I don't have I don't order anything online. I don't have any of that because I feel really, I feel like environmentally, I think there's a very big element of that. But also, I think we do not appreciate the value of the material itself. So when a piece of textile went through my grandmother's hands, through her door in her house, and it started getting worn and torn, she would mend it. And when it would then get worn and torn and it was absolutely threadbare, she'd cut it up and she'd make it into something else. And then she kept repurposing it again and again and again. She even had a drawer where she had offcuts of thread that if she cut the thread too long, she would keep the little bit of thread and reuse it. So absolutely everything was used to the minutest detail. And I grew up around that. And so that became something that you just did. It wasn't like, oh, we've got to unlearn what we know. We've got to do. No, no, it was that. I also think my generation, we didn't have online shopping and the internet came in my late teens. So it wasn't, it wasn't this thing where you just ordered something immediately and it came tomorrow. There was none of that. So it was part of that was being in the last generation that really kind of that maybe wasn't as disposable as they are now, but also definitely being embedded in my grandmother's culture. But also wool is expensive. You knitted a jumper and if it became too small or if you wanted to knit your grandchild a jumper, you just undid the wool and then you reknitted because wool was expensive. And so I constantly watched her undo and reknit. And that was really interesting to me because she just had these same jumpers on rotation. Sometimes she made these vests. Sometimes she took it apart and then reknitted it into a smaller jumper for my sister or whatever. And it was fascinating to see. And so when she passed away, I inherited all her knitwear. And so like I said, I've got four children, myself and my husband, we're a family of six, and I became obsessed with thinking about how we repurpose. And so my children are very active, they're very physical, but they also outgrow things. And so there's constant wear and tear on their clothes all the time. And I thought about how do I mend and repair it? while connecting to my heritage and my history. Like that lineage is really important, that connection to what's important. And how can I have them honor that and wear or be part of my grandmother's teachings, you know? And so I undid her knitted jumpers and I darned their clothes using her wool. And so these are, so using the two principles that I mentioned, the Boro and the Sashiko, thinking about, you know, darning the holes on their jumpers. So and it almost becomes like a family tree when you have, you know, my husband's jumper that's darned, my son's jumper that's darned, you know, my jumper then that's darned and then reinforced with those stitches, repatching, baby trousers. Oh, that's it. And so my making session, is that what it is? I wanted to show how kind of like yeah, show how I do that. So that's the end of my talk. I don't know what that, yeah. And I'm gonna do about 10 or 15 minutes of making. Shall I go into it or shall I do questions? We'll do questions at the end.
Yeah, we'll
So
do questions at the end, but if you don't mind unsharing your screen so then we can frame your hands and your face. That was so brilliant, so rich, and just has set the tone perfectly for your make along. Thank you, Aya.
Thank you. Okay, so oh, you can see. Oh, that's good. Okay, sorry, I have to say I'm the least techie person now, and Faith have been incredible teachers. Hold on, this says to her spotlight your video. Unmute. Shall I? I'm not going to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, keep everything as is. You're perfect.
So I'm gonna talk about the materials. I feel like I'm on Blue Peter. Sorry, I just really like this. Okay, there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about materials, essential materials that you will need. And I wanted to just also say that this is an important make along that I wanted to do because there are some big topics that you can talk about, like displacement and migration and politics and all that. But actually, just the act of darning and mending is a really important one, you know? I'm going to speak a little bit more about that while I'm making. So I'm going to start by, so this is just an example of some of the knit. Can you see that? Yeah. Some of the knit that, like a knitted piece that I would pull apart. So you can see that, can you see that? Hold on. Oh my God, yeah. So when you pull the thread, you are literally pulling apart the knitted oh my God, I don't even know where I'm there. There. Can you see? So you're just constantly undoing the knit. And I really think about the labor that it took to knit, what she thought while she was making and all of that, but then also how this thread passed through her hands and now passing through my hands long after she's gone. And the kind of, yeah, I think a lot about the continuity of that. And I find that you don't have that when you bulk buy things from Primark or Amazon. You know, it's all, you know, made in China, processed on a machine. But actually, this is not, you know, look at the way the wool curls. You know, this is straight, you know, but you know that it's been used when it's curly. So there's something about the materiality of that that I really love. This is wool that I've pre-pulled. It's very different. It's very much thinner. You've got the option of embroidery hoops to isolate your patch, which I always find really helpful and really useful. This is just a selection. I might go for this size one today. But I find it really, really helpful because it isolates the patch, and especially if you're working with younger groups where they don't really have the dexterity to stretch things, it's very, very helpful. Your needles, depending on the size of the wool, you would get different eyes. But yeah, I'm going to go for, no, am I going to go for that? I'm going to go for this one. And then, oops, and then some really sharp embroidery scissors. I just find that if you have blunt scissors, you tend to pull the fabric and it becomes a nightmare. So just always making sure you've got really sharp scissors. So that's the materials that I have that I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show you some of the clothes here. Hold on, I just want to, is there, oh God, what have I done? Can you see me? Yeah. I don't know if it's too dark. Can you see? Okay. This is the item that I showed on the screen. I feel like it's very dark. I don't know if you can see, but anyway, it's all been patched and mended here. I'm gonna show a few more. This is another one where I used old bits of fabrics and old scraps to patch bigger holes, and then I used the sashiko stitch to reinforce the fabric. And yeah, I mean, historically, this was done as a means to save on materials because materials are expensive. You know, fabrics are expensive. But for me, it's that and sentimental. So yeah, you tie it together. I have them all here, but I'm gonna work on this one, on this red one. And I'm going to show you how to darn. So I'm gonna hold it up to darn. But the first thing I'd do is I'd isolate the patch. So I'd open up my embroidery hoop and I'd isolate the patch. So here I've got a hole, if you can see. And I'm going to isolate it and darn it. I think a lot about I think a lot about the holes. I think a lot about how they were made and the action that you know the kind of the physicality of the person who's made the holes, and so you then can become invested in the person and their story, and it's all about connection. I really find the act of making, it's not just about the product or what it ends up looking like. It's actually about the process. The process is such an important part of it. And the conversation is really, really important. So I thread the needle. Whoops. There we go. Nope. Hold on. I'm spotlighted here. Okay. And I would always do one line. Tie it up. Okay, so I'd isolate the thing, and the idea is you're recreating a warp and a weft. So can you see here? No, there. You've got horizontal lines and vertical lines, and that's what you're trying to recreate. Is that like that is what you're trying to? Oh my God, I don't know where the camera is. There, you're trying to create almost like a lattice. That is what the concept of every fiber is. You've got a warp and a weft. And so that's what you're trying to do. So you would start, if you wanted no, you can't see here. So if you wanted to darn this, you would go up and you would just go up and down, first of all. So as I'm doing this, you can see how I'm making it. It doesn't need any more description. But the beauty of this is that, or the beauty of mending and repair is not about making it seamless. It's not about making it perfect. The idea is that you're really highlighting the imperfection. You're highlighting the mark. You know, there's a reason why it's in purple or in a different color. It's not about It's not about hiding the imperfection, but it's about making it, you know, much more apparent. And there's a lot to be said in that as well. I wonder, and these are just kind of questions for you as you're watching this being made, but you know, thinking about the thing that you're mending and how it got worn. That's one thing, and that's definitely conversation topics that could be had. You know, while you're making, you're not really thinking about it's a bit like driving, you know, you're not really thinking about the movement, the action that you're doing, you're just doing it. And so when you're using your hands, you're then freeing up your mind to be able to share stories and talk. And I always find it so interesting when I'm doing this, I'll do it around my children. So if my child has a patch that needs mending on their knee, on the knee of their trousers or whatever, I'll always engage in conversation. I'll say, well, how did you do that? Or what were you doing when you tore a hole through this or that. And it opens up conversations around the story, around the memory of what they made. And that's really, really important because I think that mindfulness of making whilst talking is something we're so disconnected from more and more in our society. We're really disconnected with being comfortable enough to talk and share while we are busying our hands. Everything is so instant, everything is so immediate now, everything is digital a lot of the time. And this is why I go back to talking about how textiles are anarchic, because this is an active way to slow things down, to actually say, no, I am purposefully taking my time with this, and I'm going against the status quo. So I've done all my vertical lines, and now I'm going to go horizontal. I don't know if you, okay, if you can see. So these are all vertical lines. Now I pull the thread sideways and I go in, out, in, out, in, out across all the lines. If you can see that. It takes a lot of patience, and you have to be really careful, because if you miss one, then it ruins the whole line. But can you see how you go in, out, in, out, in, out across the whole thing? And yes, and so some of the things that I consider a lot is thinking about the object that you're mending and being conscious of at what point do you discard the object? You know, how important is it to keep this object or keep mending it? And I suppose that is a very personal question, depending on who you're asking. For me, I always tend to be very, very sentimental about things, and so I keep everything. And even if I don't use it for what it is anymore, I do keep it, and I always use it as an offcut for something else. I think, oh God, yeah. So I think those are very important questions that we don't tend to ask ourselves anymore, because people don't need to keep anything. Everything is available at any given point in time, all the time. And that is, I find that something sad if we lose touch with that, because then, you see, because then we're not purposeful with the things we own, you know? So can you see where I'm going with that? Yeah. There's a really lovely quote that says, mending is a delayed gratitude for something that has served you well. And I really, that really resonates with me, because the act, the care and the attention that you're giving this is a lot, especially if you're busy, especially if, you know, if it's easy to replace. But it's about yeah, it's about this gratitude for this textile that otherwise that has served you, that has served you for whatever purpose or for whatever reason. Hold on. There we go. I find that a lot of workshops that I do with younger people, it's interesting to see how their attention span is much, much slower, sorry, is much less, sorry, not slower, than older generations. I think that that's something that teachers or educators, and by educators, I mean also parents, teachers, people who interact with young people, have to actively push against and hopefully inspire to continue. I think it's really important that that we are taught patience, because the thing with craft and textiles is that it takes a long, long time to realize something. It's definitely not instant. And that perseverance is something that you know you can't really teach a generation that is born into everything being really instant, and that dopamine hit and that immediate dopamine hit. But it's definitely something that can be achieved through what's the word? Through repetition and consistency. And so, yeah, I mean, I find that very, with my children, I find that a really, really important lesson with them. They help me mend their clothes, and they help me, oh God, they help me work on those things with them, because I want them also to appreciate the value of the things that they own. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Um, okay. I think also it's when you're doing something like this and you're showing an example of it, it's very it focuses a lot on the process rather than the finished product. And a lot of the time, we put so much focus on the finished product. You might work on a piece of textile with your class or with the group for months, maybe for a whole term or a whole year even, and you might feel like you're not getting anywhere with it. But it's really important also to highlight and draw attention to process, because as artists, it's about the process. It's all about the process. The finished product is, for me at least, it's very, very secondary. Okay, so I've finished darning that little patch. The back looks like this, so you can see it's pretty neat. I could have cut that a bit better, but yeah, the whole patch is on the front. So I will knot the back, and then I will show you just very quickly how to do. This is a very simple process of how to do a bit of sashiko across the top. So I took some of the other thread. This is a bit thinner. And then, so thread the needle. Again, I always use one thread. It's much more economical, and also you're not dealing with bunching up of fabrics or anything like that. And it's very much up to you how you decide to what direction. So I might go up in a straight line. So I would start here. And again, this is all function, it's decorative. I mean, your choice of color and where you place things and all of that is totally up to you or the artist or whoever it is. So everyone will have an individual creation. There will be no two things that look exactly the same. But it's also functional, because what you're doing is you're reinforcing the fabric. And so you just pull it out, and then you almost like you just do a running stitch, but it's almost like a little snaking. So you go in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, and then you pull it out the other way, that way. And I'll continue a bit more so you could see the effect on the red. And you carry it on that way. I pulled the thread out of my needle, excuse me. One thing about slowness, the slowness of something, of taking the time and working slowly, like craft makes you, is that it's often misunderstood, or it often gets framed as inefficiency. But actually, if you think about what it is when you take things slowly, it's really the whole definition of care. If you take things slowly and you think about process, then it's all about care, really. And I think that's a really important way to reframe the pace at which you learn, but also the pace at which you make. So this is essentially how you would do it, and you would keep doing it. So like these ones, I just kept going with whatever. These are purely decorative, but they do reinforce. So you can see that this bit of the textile is a bit more robust than this bit, for instance. But it is meant to continue off the borrow, and it kind of creates a really beautiful pattern. So yeah, so that is the end of my make along. I went over. I'm sorry, Mel.
No, that was absolutely perfect. You took the time you needed. Thank you so much, Aya. It's just even seeing it under the light that you have now, the thread that you've got, it's like glitter almost, weaving all those your stories and your process. We saw it. I could watch you all day. So brilliant. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and it's at the moment we don't really have a question there, but I have a question for you, if you don't mind me asking. And I think it could be useful for Flora as well, I guess. I guess two things that I've been thinking about is sometimes narratives and stories come up and they just need to be heard. And then sometimes there are things that come up that might require action or for you to be guided by that. How do you discern between sort of which bit to take and to act on, and then which bit to sit and listen and hold?
How do you mean? Sorry, but acting on, like, could you give me?
So, for example, let's say I was thinking about this in the classroom. There's an idea or something that comes up and it's sparked. How do you decide when to use that narrative to guide your work? And then how do you decide to step back from it and observe it for what it is? Do you ever have a process like that, or are you kind of guided by anything that comes up is how you dive in and start making? Is that your making process?
You mean like how conceptually how do the ideas generate into artworks?
Into artwork, yeah.
I mean, I can't, all, any concept that I've ever had for an artwork has always come from a conversation or a question or even picking something up and being like,
Mm,
this is interesting.
mm,
It sparks questions for me. And
mm,
for me personally, I think good art has to create arenas for discussion and conversation.
mm,
And so,
mm,
it will always, I think it also has to be a reflection of something very personal. So
mm,
if I if there's a question that comes up, or an item or an object that for me remind, or a smell or something like that that just takes me back to something, I need to dive deeper into those questions and then think about how I expand on that.
mm,
It's difficult to give one answer, but I think it's part of the creative process and the way artists' brains are wired. I just think that we see things, it can't be prescriptive. You can never write a manual on that, but it's just
mm,
about, and with that, that means that there is no right or wrong. So the way in which you see something, we can both see the exact same thing, but take away two extremely different uh, answers to it, or two different perspectives to it. Um, but I think that's what's so important about creating artists, or allowing artists platforms to create, is because they can reshape the world just through the lens that they're creating.
mm.
And I also think that's why it's really important to have conversation around, like, create conversation. So now, like, while you're making, you might sit in a session as a teacher facilitating a session, and you might not, nobody might produce anything, like nothing might be created at all, but actually the just sitting together and having a conversation might spark something in one,
Yeah,
and that will filter out into so many processes in making. So I think,
absolutely. Hmm.
yeah,
And especially in I think in the climate that we are, everything is so as teachers in general, we feel really attached to outcomes and having to evidence everything. But this is almost a craft school is that permission almost to allow yourself to make slowly, to allow young people to have conversations and see that as the valuable process of making. Because as you said, you need to connect it back to an idea. And young people, children in general, they embody the artist's mind, don't they? And then something happens along the way through the process that strips that away. But intrinsically, Make First was kind of stemmed from that childlike play in early years that you see, and how valuable that is. Play, role play, conversations, and making sure that we keep that alive throughout the whole, from EYFS all the way to Key Stage 4, because it's so valuable to make your work substantial and have a meaning, so it goes beyond just something that's visually X, Y, and Z, but has heart. And I was thinking as well with Flora, in the studio spaces with the artists that share the studio space, how is it that you track process what might a day-to-day look like? I mean, I had the pleasure of visiting and seeing sort of lots of different makers, lots of different artists, all thinking different things, quite similar. Artist studios are quite similar to classrooms, actually, if you want to draw the parallels. But how is it that you support and facilitate for different makers and different ideas floating constantly?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably that it depends on how classrooms are run, but I think the difference in the studio is, I guess, freedom of choice, freedom of like what you want to do. Like, there's the artist has their individual interests, and I think sometimes it's not conversations in our studios, depending on how people communicate. They might communicate, or they might not verbally communicate, but they might be exploring ideas. I think what kind of I talked about, like, you know, looking at materials and where that can take you. I think yeah, it's I guess looking in the studio, it's you don't necessarily measure kind of progress from one day to another. It's and the artist might not be concerned with that. They're just concerned with making their art and following where that is taking them. It might not be might be something they can explain. It might not be, depending. Or it might be being explained through the process of it being made itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
And one last question for both of you, whilst I've got you here. I was just thinking this responsibility that we also have for how we nurture makers and artists that are vulnerable, in this case for children, when they share vulnerable stories. What's your it could be your self-care act, Aya, in particular, because you share quite personal stories. How do you take care of yourself and the stories that you share? And Flora, for you, when you've got makers who are sharing and I guess being vulnerable in that sense, are there any little things that you do? It could be something practical, or it could be something that you think about that kind of nurtures that sense of care that we could use and translate in the classroom.
For me, I work a lot with displaced communities, and who share a lot of very heavy and loaded stories, like the one I just said about the woman whose baby was thrown overboard. And then I go back to my own children, but I also see I hate that word, like the resilience in them, but I also see kind of the fact that they continue to exist and they continue to push through it. And I also see like the humor in a lot of the things that they say. Like this woman had her baby pulled out of her arms and thrown overboard, but then also she is alive, and just that act of existence is a form of resistance, you know. And I suppose I think the idea of like helplessness and wallowing and sadness and stuff, that's not an option for the vast majority of people in the world. And so I don't lean into that in any way. I kind of see that I have absolute privilege in the fact that I've got I am the 1%. We are all the 1%, all of us sitting here, no matter what our life stories are, we've got shelter, we've got food, we've got security as more than the majority of the people in the world. So for me, you know, like the idea of processing it, I process it through making, through like the act of making is the way in which I regulate myself emotionally. But I don't allow myself to lean into, oh, like this is really sad. I'm here, I've got my kids and I've got a roof. Like this is the reality. But I also allow myself to process the stories. I understand the privilege that I have to be able to tell those stories. And that's that's the balance that I have. I don't know if that answered it, but
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think in ActionSpace, it's about, I mean, the artists are coming into the studio, and that kind of social connection is part of it as well. You're with the same other artists each week, which builds some kind of social connection over time, and but just like an atmosphere, like really respecting all of the artists' work, celebrating when works are finished or when people are doing something that's celebrated in the studio, and also like having fun, like kind of, I mean,
Yeah.
so like I would say that just like place that people know that they can come and they can just make the art and feel like in a supported environment where they feel safe to do so, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I can imagine, in a school context too, that excitement that you feel when you know it's your art lesson, or if you know it's a particular space that you can just be free, and having that a safe container for, push the tables aside if necessary, have a textiles corner if necessary, and watch what happens as young people interact with material and each other. I think, some really lovely top tips, discussions, provocations. We are just so lucky to have these conversations and for them to be shared on our program. And I hope that we enjoyed the discussion, enjoyed the making. I can see that your mouth. Do you want to say one more thing before we close?
One little thing, just because I had this conversation with one of my children's teachers. I've got 4 kids all in primary school, and my youngest one, who's 4, the teacher said to me the other day, she's like, he did so well coloring in the lines. And I just remember thinking, God, this is like, there's something about the system that is so broken from the inside, where we value and we value the idea that a child is coloring inside the lines. So like I said at the beginning about the importance of teachers, I think if you have teachers that have that mindset, that idea that actually it's okay, like we have to make mistakes. Artists make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we create. It's through mistakes, trial and error. Then that from a young age, then that I feel if you infiltrate the system that way, it's a big responsibility, but it's the only way forward, I find. That's my 2 cents. That's it.
That's a perfect way to end. Just to say a huge thank you to you, Flora, and a huge thank you to you, Aya, and for everybody that's tuned in this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you very shortly. Thank you. Take care, everyone.